If you open this door, Mom, everything changes. Michael's voice was quiet, almost carried away by the breeze drifting in from the lake. Yet the weight behind his words did not disappear with the wind. It settled between them, heavy and unavoidable, like something that had already been decided long before they ever stood there together. And Evelyn Carter remained completely still, staring down at the brass key resting in her palm. Its surface warm from her skin, but its weight far greater than something so small should ever feel, as if it carried not just metal but time, memory, and a truth she had not agreed to remember. And at 68 years old, she suddenly felt like she had stepped outside her own life and into someone else's story, because nothing about this moment aligned with the life she thought she understood. Not the cabin standing quietly in front of her with its cedar siding faded into a weathered gray. Not the porch swing hanging perfectly still as if it had been waiting for years without moving. Not the pine needles gathered in the corners untouched, like the place had been holding its breath. And definitely not the lake beyond the trees, flashing in narrow streaks of light that made her chest tighten in a way she could not explain, like a memory trying to surface but unable to break through. And beside her, Michael shifted slightly, his presence steady but careful, the way grown sons become when they begin to realize their mothers are not permanent, not unbreakable, telling her softly that she did not have to do this, that they could leave, that none of this had to matter. Yet his eyes never left the door, as if something inside him needed to know what was on the other side, as if walking away would leave a question he could not live with. And Evelyn swallowed slowly, her throat dry, her voice quieter than she intended as she said that he had told her this place was hers, even though the words felt wrong, like repeating something she had been told but did not believe. And Michael nodded, lifting the worn envelope again, the one that had started everything. Her name typed clearly across the front in deliberate letters, Evelyn Carter, and inside had been the deed, the map, and the key, proof that this place existed. Whether she remembered it or not, proof that something in her life had been real without her knowing. And now the door stood in front of her, silent but waiting, not just to be opened, but to force her to confront the possibility that the life she believed she had lived might not be the whole truth, and that whatever was behind that door would not just show her something new. It would change the meaning of everything that came before. Before this moment, Evelyn had always believed her life was simple, predictable, and fully understood, built from years of routine that gave her a sense of control and stability, the kind of life where nothing dramatic happened because everything important had already been decided through quiet effort and sacrifice, and she had grown used to that rhythm, waking up at the same time each morning, moving through familiar spaces without needing to think, preparing meals, paying bills, remembering appointments, and doing everything that needed to be done without expecting recognition, because that was the life she had built for herself, steady, responsible, and reliable. And her husband had always been part of that same structure, practical, grounded, focused on providing rather than dreaming, never extravagant, never impulsive, never the kind of man who would hide something as significant as a lake house from her. And that was what made this moment feel so impossible, because there had been no signs, no missing time, no unexplained weekends, no photographs of them smiling near water, no stories about quiet getaways or hidden places, only a life that made sense in its consistency, a life that felt complete in its simplicity. And when Michael had first shown her the documents, she had laughed, not because she found it amusing, but because it had to be wrong, because the alternative meant that her understanding of her own life had gaps she could not explain. And Michael had not laughed with her. He had sat across from her at the table with a seriousness that unsettled her, explaining that he had checked everything carefully, that the attorney had confirmed the property was legally hers, that the records were valid, and that it had been arranged years ago, long before her husband passed away, and that when the trust account connected to the property had finally run out, the attorney had been required to reach out. And Evelyn had shaken her head, insisting again that her husband would never do something like that without telling her, because that was not who he was, not the man she had known, not the man she had lived beside for decades. And yet the more she tried to hold on to that certainty, the more it began to feel unstable, because the documents did not change, the facts did not shift, and the truth did not require her to understand it in order to exist. And what unsettled her most was not just that there was a cabin she did not remember, but that if something like this could exist without her knowledge, then what else might she have forgotten? What else might have been part of her life without leaving any trace in her memory? And she found herself thinking back through the years in small, quiet fragments, ordinary mornings that blurred together, evenings that felt familiar but indistinct, conversations she could remember in tone but not in exact words, wondering if something had slipped between those moments unnoticed. And she began to question not just the missing cabin, but the reliability of her own memory, because memory had always been the one thing she trusted without question, and now even that felt uncertain. And standing there in front of the door with the key in her hand, she realized the most unsettling possibility was not that something new had appeared in her life, but that something important had been there all along, quietly existing just beyond her awareness, waiting for the moment when she would finally be forced to see it. The door opened with a soft click that seemed far louder than it should have in the stillness surrounding them, and as it slowly gave way, the cabin released a faint breath of cool air that carried the scent of cedar, dust, and something older, something preserved rather than forgotten, and Evelyn hesitated at the threshold, her body resisting even as her eyes searched the space beyond, because stepping inside did not feel like entering a place. It felt like crossing into something unfinished, something waiting, something that had been paused instead of abandoned, and just beyond the doorway, resting on the floor as if it had been placed there moments ago with deliberate care, lay another envelope, clean, uncreased, untouched by time, her name written across it again in the same neat, unwavering print, Evelyn Carter, and Michael's voice dropped into a near whisper as he said there was more, as if speaking any louder might disturb whatever had been set in motion long before they arrived. And Evelyn felt something shift inside her, not curiosity anymore, but something heavier, something closer to unease, because this was no longer about documents or legal records. This was about intention, about someone who had planned this moment carefully, step by step, knowing exactly what she would see and when she would see it. And she stepped inside slowly, the wooden floor creaking under her weight, each sound echoing softly through the quiet space, and the cabin revealed itself in fragments. A couch covered neatly with a simple throw, a small table positioned beside a window that looked out toward the lake, a stone fireplace that appeared ready but unused, everything arranged with quiet purpose. Nothing out of place, nothing abandoned, and that was what unsettled her most, because it did not feel like a forgotten house. It felt like a paused life, like someone had stepped away expecting to return at any moment, and yet she had no memory of ever being that person, and she bent down carefully, picking up the envelope with both hands as if it might break or disappear if she touched it too quickly, her voice small as she said this was not funny, even though she knew no one was joking, and Michael immediately shook his head, swearing he had never been here before, that he had not placed anything, and she believed him without hesitation, and that belief made everything heavier, because it meant this moment had been constructed by someone else, someone who knew her well enough to guide her here. And as she stood there holding the envelope, she became aware of something else, something subtle but impossible to ignore, a quiet tension in the air, like the cabin itself was holding a story that had not yet been told, and her fingers tightened slightly around the envelope as she realized that whatever she was about to uncover had not been waiting randomly. It had been waiting for her, specifically, patiently, as if this exact moment had always been part of something she had once started but never finished. And the most unsettling part was not the mystery in front of her, but the growing sense that the answers she was about to find would not introduce something new into her life. They would reveal something that had been hers all along. Evelyn stood in the center of the room with the envelope still in her hands, her fingers pressing lightly against the paper as if she could feel something through it, something that might explain why it was here, why it was waiting, and why her name appeared again in that same calm, deliberate print. And for a moment she did not open it, not because she lacked curiosity, but because she was beginning to understand that whatever was inside would not simply answer questions, it would create new ones, deeper ones, the kind that could not be undone once they were known. And Michael watched her closely, his presence steady but tense, as if he could feel the shift in her hesitation. And when she finally slid her finger under the edge of the envelope and pulled it open, the sound of paper separating felt unnaturally loud in the quiet cabin, and she unfolded the letter slowly, her eyes moving across the first lines with caution, then stopping, then going back, as if she needed to confirm that what she was reading was real, and the words did not feel distant or formal. They felt personal, measured, written by someone who knew her well enough to anticipate how she would react. And the letter spoke about timing, about waiting until she was ready, about how some truths should not be forced into the open too early, and that alone unsettled her, because it suggested that whatever had been hidden was not accidental. It had been deliberately kept from her. And then her eyes caught on a single line that seemed to hold everything still. When you are ready to forgive yourself. And she whispered it out loud without meaning to, the words sounding unfamiliar in her own voice, because she did not understand what she was supposed to forgive. And Michael asked her quietly what it said, but she did not answer immediately, because the question forming in her mind was heavier than anything she could say out loud. And she continued reading, her breathing slower now, more deliberate, as if each sentence required effort, and the letter described moments she could not remember, references to a summer, to standing by the water, to conversations that felt too specific to dismiss, yet completely absent from her memory, and the disconnect began to press against her more forcefully. Because this was not vague or symbolic language. This was precise, intentional, written as if the writer expected her to recognize it, and yet she did not. And that gap between what was written and what she remembered felt like standing on unstable ground. And then there was a direction, simple and direct, telling her to look in the tin box by the fireplace, and her eyes moved slowly toward it. The small metal box sitting quietly as if it had always been there, waiting to be noticed, and she felt a hesitation rise inside her, not because of the object itself, but because of what it represented, a continuation of something she did not understand. And she realized in that moment that this was no longer about discovering something external. This was about confronting something internal, something within her own life that had been hidden. And she turned slightly toward Michael, her voice lower now, more uncertain than before, saying that none of this made sense. And Michael nodded. But there was something different in his expression now, not just confusion, but concern, because he could see that this was affecting her in a way that went beyond curiosity. And Evelyn looked back at the letter, reading the final lines again, noticing how calm they were, how certain, how they did not try to convince her, but simply assumed she would continue. And that realization unsettled her more than anything else, because it meant whoever had written this understood her well enough to know she would not walk away. And as she lowered the paper slightly, her gaze settling again on the tin box across the room, she felt the weight of the moment settle into something undeniable. Because whatever she was about to do next would not just reveal information, it would force her to question the reliability of her own memory, her own choices, and possibly the version of herself she had trusted for years. And the most unsettling part was not that something was hidden, but that it might have been hidden for a reason she had once agreed to, a reason she could no longer remember. Evelyn did not move immediately, even after lowering the letter from her hands, because the direction it had given her now carried more weight than the words themselves, and her eyes remained fixed on the small tin box by the fireplace as if it had become something far more significant than its appearance suggested. And for a moment, she felt an unexpected resistance rise inside her, not because she was afraid of the object itself, but because she was beginning to understand that each step forward was pulling her deeper into something she no longer controlled. And Michael noticed the hesitation, stepping slightly closer without touching her, his voice low and careful as he asked if she wanted him to open it instead. But Evelyn shook her head almost immediately, the response instinctive, because whatever was inside that box was meant for her, and more importantly, it was something she needed to face herself, even if she did not yet understand why. And so she took a slow breath and began to walk toward the fireplace, each step measured, each movement deliberate. The quiet creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet echoing through the cabin as if marking the passage of something larger than distance. And when she finally reached the shelf, she paused again, her hand hovering just above the metal surface. And the moment her fingertips made contact, a sudden, fleeting sensation passed through her, not a full memory, but something sharper, more immediate, like the edge of recognition, sunlight reflecting off water, the faint sound of laughter carried on air. The feeling of standing somewhere peaceful, and then it was gone, leaving behind only a lingering sense of something just out of reach. And she pulled her hand back slightly, startled by the intensity of it, admitting quietly that she had felt something. And Michael's expression shifted as he said that meant something, his voice carrying both hope and uncertainty. And Evelyn looked back at the box, her hesitation replaced now by a growing need to understand what was happening, and she forced herself to open it, the lid lifting with a soft metallic sound that seemed almost too gentle for the weight of the moment. And inside, resting neatly as if placed with care, was a cassette tape in a clear plastic case, the kind she had not seen in years, and her breath caught slightly as she noticed the label, handwritten in a familiar style that she recognized before she allowed herself to fully acknowledge it. And beneath the tape was a small key, different from the one she held earlier, lighter, more delicate, and beside it a folded note with only a few words written clearly. "Play this before upstairs." And her gaze shifted instinctively toward the staircase she had barely noticed before, narrow and steep, leading upward into a space she could not yet see. And her pulse quickened as the meaning of the instruction settled into her mind. Because this was not just about discovering objects. This was a sequence, a deliberate path designed to guide her step by step. And she realized with a growing sense of unease that someone had anticipated not only her arrival, but her actions, her reactions, even her hesitation, and that realization made everything feel more controlled than she was comfortable with. As if she was following a script she had once agreed to but could no longer remember, and she picked up the cassette tape carefully, turning it slightly in her hands, her fingers tracing the edges as if trying to confirm it was real. And for a brief moment, she considered not playing it, considered stepping back, walking out, leaving everything behind before it became something she could not undo. But the thought did not last, because the questions already inside her were too strong, too persistent, and walking away would not remove them. It would only leave them unanswered, and Michael moved toward the old stereo system on the side table, glancing at her for confirmation before touching anything. And when she gave a small nod, he wiped a thin layer of dust from the surface and pressed the button to open the tape deck. And Evelyn stepped closer, her movements slower now, more controlled, as if she was preparing herself for something she could not yet define. And when she finally slid the cassette into place, her hand lingered for just a moment before pressing the play button, because she understood, even without knowing the details, that whatever came next would not simply add to the mystery. It would begin to explain it. And that explanation might be the very thing she was not ready to hear. The moment Evelyn pressed the play button, there was a brief stretch of silence filled only by the faint mechanical hum of the tape catching up to motion, and then a voice emerged, low, steady, unmistakably familiar, and it struck her with a force she had not prepared for, because it was not just a voice from the past. It was him, her husband, speaking her name in the same calm tone she had known for years, and her body reacted before her mind could process it, her grip tightening on the edge of the table as her knees weakened slightly. And beside her Michael froze, his breath held as if he understood that any movement might break the fragile connection forming in the air. And the voice continued, addressing her directly, saying that if she was hearing this, then she had made it back. And those words alone shifted something deep inside her, because they carried an assumption she could not yet accept, that she had been here before, that this was not a discovery but a return. And the voice did not rush. It moved carefully, deliberately, as if each sentence had been chosen with intention, telling her that he did not know what year it would be when she listened, did not know how much she would remember or how much she would question, but he did know one thing with certainty, that she had deserved a quiet place long before life had ever given her one. And Evelyn felt her throat tighten because she did not remember asking for that. And yet the truth of it settled uncomfortably inside her, because there had been moments in her life, countless small ones, where she had felt overwhelmed without ever saying it out loud. And the voice continued, explaining that the cabin had always been for her, not as a surprise meant to impress, not as an apology meant to fix something, but as a promise made during a time she had almost forgotten. And then he described it, a summer, a moment on the dock, the way she had stood looking out at the water and said she wanted a place where no one needed anything from her, a place where she could hear her own thoughts again. And Evelyn shook her head instinctively, whispering no under her breath. because she could not remember saying those words, but the feeling behind them was too real to deny, and the voice continued, acknowledging that she might not remember, that she might even resist the idea, but insisting that the reason was not failure, it was survival, that there had been a time when everything felt too heavy, when she had been carrying more than she could hold while still trying to be strong for everyone around her. And in order to keep moving forward, she had begun to bury the things that felt too big, too overwhelming, too difficult to face. And eventually, she had buried the need for this place as well. And when she buried the need, she buried the memory of it too. And Evelyn's breathing grew uneven as the realization began to take shape. Because this was not about something being taken from her. It was about something she had let go of without realizing the cost. And Michael shifted slightly beside her, his voice barely audible as he said her name. But she could not respond, because the words coming from the tape were pulling her attention inward, forcing her to confront something she had never questioned before. And the voice softened slightly, explaining that he had kept the cabin, that he had maintained it quietly, arranged everything so it would remain hers, not because he wanted to hide it from her, but because he had been afraid she would let it go completely if she tried to face it too soon. And he admitted that he had not known how to help her carry what she was feeling. So instead he had tried to protect it, to preserve it until she was ready. And those words landed heavily, because they revealed not just intention, but care, a kind of quiet understanding she had not realized he possessed. And then the voice gave her one final instruction, telling her to go to the window, to look for the stone near the dock, and saying that when she saw it, she would know, not as a question but as certainty. And Evelyn felt her heart begin to race as she turned slowly toward the window, her movements unsteady but driven by something she could not ignore. And when her eyes found the stone outside, small, pale, marked with a single carved line, the recognition hit her instantly, not as a thought, but as a knowing, and she whispered that she had done that, the words leaving her without hesitation, and behind her the tape continued, the voice softer now, almost fading, telling her not to punish herself for forgetting, telling her that forgetting had not been weakness, it had been part of surviving. And then the tape clicked quietly as it reached its end, leaving the room filled with silence that felt heavier than before, because now the mystery was no longer distant, it was personal, and whatever came next would not just explain the past, it would force her to confront the version of herself she had left behind. Evelyn did not realize she had started moving until she was already walking, her body drawn forward by something deeper than curiosity, something closer to recognition, and she stepped toward the window slowly, each movement careful, as if the ground beneath her might shift again, and Michael followed just behind her, not speaking, sensing that whatever was happening now was something she needed to face on her own. And when she reached the glass, she placed her hand lightly against it without thinking, her eyes scanning the area near the path that led toward the dock. And then she saw it, the stone, small and pale against the ground, marked with a single carved line that looked simple at first glance but carried an immediate, undeniable familiarity. And the moment her eyes settled on it, something inside her locked into place, not as a thought but as a certainty, and her breath caught as the words left her without hesitation, saying quietly that she had done that. And Michael's head turned sharply toward her, his expression shifting from confusion to something closer to shock, because he could hear the difference in her voice, the absence of doubt. And Evelyn remained still, staring at the stone as fragments of sensation began to surface, not fully formed memories but impressions, the feeling of warm wood beneath her feet, the sound of water moving gently against the dock, the faint echo of her own laughter carried on open air, and she pressed her hand harder against the glass as if it might steady her, her chest rising and falling unevenly. And behind her the tape had already fallen silent, leaving the room filled with a quiet that felt heavier now, because it was no longer empty, it was filled with meaning. And she turned slowly, her gaze moving back across the cabin as if seeing it differently. Now, not as a place she had never known, but as a place she had somehow left behind, and that realization unsettled her more than anything else, because it suggested not just missing memory, but a missing version of herself. And she moved toward the staircase without speaking, her hand still gripping the smaller key from the tin box, and Michael followed, his steps quieter now, more cautious. as if he understood that whatever they were about to find upstairs would not just answer questions, it would change them. And the stairs creaked under their weight as they climbed, the narrow space above opening into a simple loft that felt even more intimate than the room below. And Evelyn paused at the top, her eyes adjusting as she took in the details: a narrow bed neatly made, a small dresser, a mirror covered with cloth, everything arranged with the same quiet care as the rest of the cabin. And then she noticed the door tucked slightly to the side, smaller, less obvious, and something about it drew her attention immediately, because it felt like the next step in a sequence she was beginning to understand, and she moved toward it slowly, her fingers tightening around the key as she reached the handle. And when she inserted the key and turned it, the lock gave way easily, as if it had never been meant to resist her, and the door opened into a small storage space, simple but carefully arranged. And in the center of the floor sat a box, sealed, untouched, waiting, and on top of it lay a photograph face down. And Evelyn's breath slowed as she stepped forward, kneeling slightly to pick it up. And when she turned it over, everything inside her stilled completely, because it was her, younger, standing on the dock with her husband beside her, both of them smiling in a way she could not remember feeling. And the lake stretched behind them, unmistakable, undeniable, and Michael's voice broke slightly as he said she had been there. And Evelyn did not answer, because the truth was no longer something she could question. It was something she could see, something she could hold. And as she set the photograph aside and reached for the box beneath it, she understood that whatever was inside would not just explain the past, it would force her to face the version of herself she had forgotten. And for the first time, she was no longer asking whether it was real, she was asking why she had let it go. Evelyn sat back on her heels with the photograph still in her hand, her fingers gripping the edges slightly tighter than she realized, as if letting go of it might undo what she had just seen. And Michael crouched beside her, his expression no longer just confused but shaken, because the image in front of them was no longer something that could be questioned or explained away. It was proof, clear and undeniable, that she had been here, that this place had been part of her life in a way she could not remember. And the silence between them stretched longer than it should have, filled with the weight of everything neither of them knew how to say. And finally Michael spoke, his voice quieter than before, asking how something like this could exist without her knowing. And Evelyn did not answer immediately, because the truth forming in her mind was not simple. It was layered, complicated, and unsettling in a way she had never experienced before. And instead of responding, she reached for the box beneath the photograph, her movements slower now, more deliberate, as if she understood that whatever was inside would not just answer questions, it would deepen them. And when she pulled the lid open, she found a stack of letters tied together carefully, along with a notebook she recognized instantly, not because she remembered it clearly, but because something about it felt deeply personal. And when she opened it, her breath caught again, because the handwriting inside was hers. Unmistakable, the same rhythm, the same shape of letters she had used for years. And the first line stopped her completely, telling her that if she was reading this, it meant she had forgotten again. And the words felt like they were reaching across time directly to her, not accusing, not blaming, but explaining. And she read further, her eyes moving faster now, the entries describing exhaustion, pressure, the constant weight of responsibility, and a fear she had never allowed herself to admit out loud, that she was beginning to lose herself inside the life she had built. And Michael leaned closer, reading over her shoulder, his expression tightening as he realized that this was not just about a hidden place. It was about a hidden struggle. And he asked quietly if she had been okay back then. And Evelyn's voice came out softer than she expected as she said she did not know, because the version of herself who wrote those words had been someone she no longer fully recognized. And she turned another page, reading about the lake, about standing on the dock, about wanting a place where she could breathe without feeling needed. And the connection between the journal and the cabin became undeniable. And then she found the letters addressed to her, to someone else. And one name appeared repeatedly, Margaret Hill. And her pulse quickened as she realized that this was not something she had gone through alone, that someone else had been involved, someone who knew, someone who had been part of whatever decision she had made. And Michael noticed it too, asking who Margaret was. And Evelyn shook her head slowly, admitting that she did not remember. And that realization hit harder than anything else, because it meant there were people in her life she had completely lost, not through distance, but through something deeper, and she reached for one of the letters, her hands steadier now despite the storm building inside her, because the fear had begun to shift into something else, something more focused, more determined, and as she held the paper in her hands, she realized that this was no longer just about discovering what had been hidden, it was about understanding why it had been hidden, and more importantly, why she had allowed it to be hidden in the first place. Evelyn held the letter in her hands for a long moment before opening it, not because she was afraid of what it might say, but because she understood now that whatever was written inside would not just explain the past, it would define how she chose to move forward. And when she finally unfolded the paper, her eyes moved slowly across the familiar handwriting, her own handwriting, and the words did not accuse or demand. They spoke gently, almost with kindness, as if the version of herself who had written them had known exactly how fragile this moment would be. And the first line made her breath catch, because it did not begin with an apology or an explanation. It began with permission, telling her that if she had found her way back here, then she had not lost herself. She had only stepped away, and Evelyn felt something shift inside her at that. Because for the first time since arriving, the weight she had been carrying began to change, not disappear, but soften, and she continued reading, the letter reminding her that needing space had not been weakness, that choosing to pause had not been failure, that the life she had built had demanded more from her than she had been willing to admit, and that in order to keep going, she had made a choice, a quiet, difficult choice, to set something aside until she was strong enough to face it again, and the realization settled into her slowly, because it reframed everything she had been struggling to understand. This was not a story about something taken from her. It was a story about something she had chosen to protect, even from herself, and Michael sat beside her, watching her face carefully, and when she finished reading, he asked softly if she was okay, and Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not just the man he had become, but the boy he had been, the boy she had been trying to protect, and she nodded slowly, her voice steadier now as she said she thought she finally understood, and Michael exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, and they moved back downstairs together, the cabin feeling different now, not unfamiliar, not uncertain, but connected, as if the space itself had been waiting for this moment of recognition. And when they stepped outside onto the porch, the air felt lighter, the lake no longer distant but calm, steady, present, and Evelyn sat down on the swing slowly, letting the gentle movement settle beneath her, and Michael sat nearby, watching her with quiet patience. And after a moment he asked the question that had brought them here, whether she loved this place. And Evelyn looked out at the water, her gaze steady, her thoughts no longer scattered but clear, and she realized that the answer was not about memory, it was about meaning, about what this place represented, about what it had always been meant to give her. And she took a slow breath before answering, saying that she had not known it existed, that she had not remembered any of it. But now she understood what it had been trying to offer her, and she smiled softly, not with sadness, but with acceptance, and said that yes, now she did. And as the porch swing moved gently beneath her, she realized that the past had not been lost, it had simply been waiting, and that coming back here had not changed who she was. It had allowed her to finally understand why she had needed to step away in the first place.